Hey there, I'm Stephanie Domet. I'm an editor at Mindful Magazine and a writer for mindful.org.
Hi, I'm Barry Boyce, editor-in-chief of Mindful Magazine and mindful.org, and author of the regular column Point of View.
And this is the Point of View podcast.
So I don't want to hold myself up as the paragon of perfect mindfulness. How am I going to make me a better me? So my wife gives me a look at that point, and it's that look that I needed to pay attention to. Oh, I've been talking too long.
Today, Barry and I are settled into his office at Mindful, so you might hear the occasional sound of traffic or a notification coming in on a phone. You'll definitely hear some chairs creaking as we get comfortable, and we hope you won't mind that. We're here to talk about a topic for this modern age, and that topic is rudeness. Barry, what made you want to write about rudeness from a mindful point of view?
Well, as a matter of fact, I had been to several conferences and mindfulness retreats, and I had started to notice that the level of impoliteness was as much in evidence there as it was in society at large. So I started to think, what's wrong with this picture?
What surprised you about that?
Well, I think the emphasis in mindfulness practice is to pay a lot of attention to what's happening in your mind and body and around you and with other people. And so it's just kind of a striking contrast. Now, I want to preface this all by saying that, the interesting thing about talking about any kind of mindfulness principle is that nobody's an expert. So I don't want to hold myself up as the paragon of perfect mindfulness because, you set yourself up for a fall. So I'm just another guy trying to make his way through the world with a little bit of mindfulness.
So I love that paragon of perfect mindfulness. We're going to change your title to that in the masthead. What kinds of things did you observe at conferences or elsewhere in society that made you think that there might be a connection to be drawn between a mindfulness practice and rude behavior?
Well, I think one of the main things, something that I guess in the military they call it situational awareness, which means the space that your body is taking up and how you're interacting with your immediate environment. So it involves things like if some other people are in conversation, how do you, engage in that? I found myself being frequently interrupted, and at one point I was listening intently to a speaker, and somebody grabbed my shoulder and was shaking it and saying, "Hey, you're from Mindful, right? Don't you?" And I wanted to say, what's wrong with this picture? You're interrupting me in the middle of a talk on mindfulness to pitch me a story about mindfulness.
Now, given your earlier assertion that you are not a paragon of perfect mindfulness, is this behavior that you've observed in yourself?
Oh, yes, certainly. I can, particularly now around habits with devices. When cell phones were first coming out, I thought I'm never going to have one of those things, and sure enough, I'm 3/4 of my life and work are run out of my cell phone now, and I can have a tendency to be looking at it and blocking other people, ignoring other people, that kind of thing. It has a lot to do with just not getting so self-absorbed.
Yeah, self-absorbed. Let's talk about that, because that can be a side effect of a practice that is putting you kind of in touch with yourself and what's going on in your internal landscape. So what do you want to say about self-absorption as it relates to mindfulness?
Yeah, that's one of the things that I wanted to draw out there, because I've definitely noticed it myself, that with mindfulness practice, there's the notion that you're kind of working on yourself. You know, I have some habits I want to change, or I want to figure out why I seem to make things more painful than they need to be. And, you know, there's all sorts of reasons that we want to pay more attention and figure out why things are turning out the way they are. However, that kind of project can slowly but surely morph into this big deal of the project of me. How am I going to make me a better me? And in the midst of that, you're not really paying attention to what's going on immediately. You're paying attention to building up this idea of you, the better you. So, and people notice it. And they think, oh, that's what mindfulness and meditation people are like. They're all caught up in themselves. They think that they're a big deal.
That's a bit of a tragedy, isn't it?
Yes. Well, I don't know about tragedy, but it's certainly not good for the brand, so to speak. It's a bit like how, let's say, certain yoga practitioners ostentatiously display their yoga mat that they're carrying, or, you know, the technical yoga clothes. It's sending a message that I'm wrapped up in this thing that I'm doing, and isn't it precious, and isn't it important?
So then what's I'm not going to say a better option necessarily, but what's another option for somebody who wants to be mindful and well-mannered?
Well, I think the thing that I try to remember is to allow myself to be interrupted, in the sense of allow my own absorption in my trip to be interrupted. You know, I was walking through an art gallery with my daughter and my wife about a month ago, and this was a really precious time. You know, I don't get to see my daughter all that often, and we were having a great experience together. And I got a text from a friend, and I just couldn't help myself when the ding went off. I had to stop in the middle of doing everything and look at what he had to say. It was funny, so then we had an exchange, and before you know it, I'm just standing there blocking the aisle in the art gallery, and my wife and daughter have moved on. So my wife gives me a look at that point, and it's that look that I needed to pay attention to allow it to interrupt where I was going. So if somebody says, "Excuse me," that can be a little wake-up call to come back to the moment. You know, I think that's the main thing, that there's constantly stimuli in the regular world that wake us up to the moment and allow us to come back there. You know, I think of when I put my hand on a doorknob as I'm about to enter someplace. I was taught to have that be kind of a reminder that I'm about to enter this next room, to actually use the physical sensation to alert me to where I am.
Because when we're sitting, when we're meditating, we use the breath as the anchor. As you once told me, and it's probably everybody listening to this already knows, it's always there. It's a convenient anchor. But what you're saying is there are lots of other things that we could be using. There are lots of other opportunities to sort of come back to the moment.
We do breath meditation because if you're breathing, you're alive. So the breath is always going to be there. It's rhythmic, it's reliable. So if you're doing formal meditation practice and you want to choose something that is reliably going to be there, you can't beat the breath. That's the best. But the notion isn't that we're making a big deal out of the breath. When you aren't doing formal meditation, you're doing meditation in action, meditation out in the world. And the point of noticing might be somebody's facial expression that tells you, oh, I've been talking too long. And then you can respond to that. It may be somebody's facial expression, or maybe their body language is conveying something like they're in pain. And so you might slow down and try to empathize a little bit. It's the habit of coming back to the breath can become a habit of coming back to all sorts of things.
Just tuning in to that environment, tuning into other people and how we are with them.
Yeah, precisely. And I think since we're talking about manners, we are talking about tuning into other people. It's interesting that one of the reasons that we get caught up in ourselves is that we get a lot of reinforcement for being able to control things. If you think about all the little habits you have in your life that are necessary to get through the day, so you tie your shoes, you have total control over that, putting your clothes on, buttoning your shirt, putting on a cap, putting food in your mouth, opening the door, driving, walking. So in your immediate environment, you have all this control.
Okay.
But then when other people get involved, you don't have control. But the habits of trying to control continue.
Right.
So therefore, with mindfulness, we try to get beyond that zone of control as we get into mindfulness a little farther, so that we can dance with things a bit more, so that we can respond to what's coming into our world that we can't control. I can't control how somebody's going to be, so they may not fit into my plan.
Right.
And that's the ultimate in manners or kindness, that allowing somebody the space to be. So, that person that grabbed me and interrupted my listening to a talk, they had a plan that they were executing, but that plan didn't take into account where I was at.
Right.
And that's the essence of rudeness right there.
You write about, in your column, the natural flow that we can tune into. You write, when we click, it feels good. When we don't, it's awkward. And even allowing it to be awkward is part of being mindful. Can you talk a little more about that?
Well, I think the example I was using was, in conversation, for example. You're at a party or a social occasion of some kind, and you feel like, there's a natural flow to the conversation, and then somebody else comes into that conversation and it becomes kind of awkward. Being mindful at that point is a bit like what I was just talking about, is that recognizing what you can't control. And you also can't control your reactions to a new situation. So that's where awkwardness comes in. And, being okay with that is, a part of being able to relax out in the world. And when you're relaxed out in the world, you make less damage.
You make less damage.
Yeah, well, this is old-fashioned, but I think it's a Boy Scout motto to Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, Girl Guides, to leave a place in better shape than you found it.
Right, the campsite rule.
The campsite rule. Yes, exactly. So I think that's a good rule for life, that we're really talking, when we're talking about rudeness and manners, we're talking about the effect that you have on the world and noticing that. You know, it could even be that noticing how a mood that you're in might affect other people. You know, have you ever had that experience like in an office setting where somebody's in a particular kind of mood and you can almost cut it? It's that tangible.
Yes.
Well, it's worth taking responsibility for those kinds of things. That, you know, if you're having that kind of effect or creating that kind of tension, you might think about, maybe I need to go for a walk and, you know, let this air clear. You know, you want to do less harm. And there are, you know, mindfulness can help you to pay attention to all sorts of levels of harm, and including leaving people with a feeling like they're not being paid attention to, they're not being listened to, they're not being given the space. You know, even the example I give often, and other people do, about the strange thing that happens at elevators, that people will crowd around an elevator or a subway door, and the door opens and the people on the elevator or in the subway need to get out.
Yes.
But there's no room for them to get out because you haven't given them the space. So it's a kind of a nice little dance in life when the people waiting for the door can leave open space, the other people come out, the new space opens up, and the new people go in. There's a kind of an elegance to that. And being mindful has a certain elegance to it in that way. Graciousness. You know, I used to work for this guy, one of my first jobs. I worked for an old man from Hungary who had a little dress shop, and I used to sweep up for him. Mr. Paul Steinbach, Mr. Paul. And Mr. Paul, whenever you would go into his shop, you know, when I would show up for work, he would always take a moment and say, "Mr. Barry, how are you today? How are you doing?" And he would wait and leave pauses to for you to respond. You know, you felt noticed, and there was a moment of two people spending time together. It wasn't rushed, and he was extremely graceful in everything that he did. And I think that that's just an aspect of natural mindfulness. So if we actually take up formal mindfulness, we shouldn't become so self-absorbed that we lose sight of the possibility of having that kind of grace.
Had you begun your formal mindfulness practice at that point? Did you recognize that as mindfulness?
It's interesting. I hadn't quite yet, but I recognized it in retrospect. And I later on wrote about Mr. Paul because I actually went back and visited him when he was retired and older, because I had great admiration for that kind of elegance and grace from just a very ordinary man who just owned a dress shop in a small town. He was not anything special, but he was, I might say he was a paragon of grace and elegance and kindness.
That really draws a direct line between being mindful and not being rude. Like that's a direct line that you've drawn.
Yeah, I think maybe grace and gracefulness gets at the point. Grace and gracefulness and ease, that's mindfulness, not getting caught up in yourself. And that's a trap. We think that if we focus more on ourselves, then we're going to get better. And in fact, in the end, we discover that we don't need quite so much focus on ourselves at all.
So, what kind of challenge would you issue to our listeners regarding this as they go about their day?
Well, I think the same challenge that I keep trying to issue to myself is to listen to people better. I mean, you just talked about our listeners, and I think that's a good reminder that listening, you might even say with your whole body, so that you're really noticing how people are and perhaps the effect that you're having or that you could have. So I think that's the challenge in terms of this topic of today, is to listen as well as you can.
Anything else on your mind today?
There was, but I don't know that I can reconstruct it. The fact that my plane was delayed and I got in at 4 a.m, and may be affecting that.
How'd it go with your pants this morning?
Yeah, no, they went on backwards. That didn't work out that well.
Well, thank you for this, Barry Boyce. I am newly inspired. I was electrified by the idea of listening with my whole body. So I'm pretty sure I can chew on that for the next couple of months until we meet again.
Well, thanks. I enjoyed it.
This has been Mindful's Point of View podcast with Barry Boyce. If you want to talk to us about what you heard on the podcast, or if you have a question for us, you can drop us a line at mindful@mindful.org. If you liked what you heard, consider sharing us with a friend. If you really liked what you heard, consider leaving us a review on iTunes. We appreciate it. Thank you. I'm Stephanie Domet. Till next time, listen with your whole body.